This is the review video on factoring trinomials. Alright, so factoring essentially means that you want to write it as a multiplication problem. So when you see this word factor, alright, again that means they want you to write this expression, this trinomial, as its factors, which means that you're going to write it like a multiplication problem, like that. Alright, and the trick for this is that when you have just an x squared in front, that means like 1x squared, you know, just it's sort of like an imaginary 1x squared. You're going to think about what multiplies to get the last term, 18, and what same two numbers would add up to get 9. Alright, that middle thing next to the x. So maybe you go through in your head and you think about, okay, well, what multiplies to 18? Well, 9 and 2 multiply to get 18, because 9 times 2 is 18. But 9 plus 2 does not equal 9, so that couldn't work. So then you go back and you think, okay, well, what else could equal 18? Well, I know that 6 and 3 equals 18, so 6 times 3 equals 18. And, oh look, 6 plus 3 equals 9 as well. So that means that my factored form here is x plus 6 times x plus 3. Alright, and again, you guys were doing pretty well with this, with just the positives, and that's good. It gets a little bit tougher with negatives here. Alright, again, when it says factor, that just means I want you to figure out like what multiplication problem would give you this trinomial. Think about it the same way. So what times what is going to equal negative 32? That negative is important. Okay, and also what plus what will equal, again, negative 14. Okay, so I'm going to think in my head, I'm going to think about, okay, so since the things that are multiplying equal a negative, right, I know that one of those numbers has to be negative. Because if they were both positive, it would be positive 32. If they were both negative, it would be positive 32. So one of them needs to be negative. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to think about, maybe use my multiplication chart, maybe use a calculator. What multiplies to get 32? 8 times 4 is 32, but negative 8 plus 4 would not equal negative 14. 8 plus negative 4 wouldn't equal negative 14. I have to go back and think a little more. Turns out that, well, 16 times 2 is 32, and now I have to figure out, okay, well, that seems maybe like it's right, but they have to add up to negative 14. And maybe think to yourself, okay, well, if it adds up to a negative, the bigger number has to be negative, so it's going to be negative 16 there, right? And that ends up what our answer is. It's x minus 16 times x plus 2. Now you could write this x plus 2 times x minus 16. That's totally fine. As long as the negative's on the 16, you're all good. So in the future, and I just want to make sure you see this and are aware of it, in this year we just really talked about when it's just x squared. But in the future you'll have to deal with things that are like 2x squared or 3x squared or 5x squared, things of that nature. And maybe you notice, like in this previous problem, since the first term is x squared, well, that just means that down here you have an x times an x to get that first term. So x times x. So what you got to think about in a problem like this, when it's not just 1x squared, you got to think about what would those first terms be that would multiply to get 2x squared, and it would be 2x and x. And from there, again, you're going to think, okay, well, what would multiply to get 15? And then it's a matter of you have to plug different numbers in here to figure out what will multiply to 15. And then when you multiply this problem, like do the box method, what would add up to 13? So it takes a little bit longer, a little more patience. If you want to try something a little more challenging today, definitely try to factor this and let me know if you have any questions. But again, this type of problem will not be on your exam this week.